Correct? Yes, involving campaign limits in Pasadena. You know, before we turn to public comment, let me just say that, this is a matter that I intend to support. When I look at campaign limits in other jurisdictions, Los Angeles, the county, they're really protections for incumbents. All of us are incumbents, but I think if someone wants to mount a challenge to any one of us, they should be free to do so. And I can tell you, having just run a citywide campaign, it can be very expensive to take on an incumbent. And, I did that. And the voters were given an option, and the voters exercised their option. And, you can't do that with the County Board of Supervisors. You can't do that in the city of Los Angeles against incumbents when you're trying to raise, hundreds, if not millions of dollars to run against a member of the city council in Los Angeles at, $800 per person. And so what ends up happening is residents lose. Residents lose the opportunity to have real campaign challenges against incumbents when it's called for. And you don't take the money out of politics with campaign limits. What ends up happening is the money is disguised. And this is what I mean by that. If you have campaign limits in the city of Los Angeles, then there are independent expenditures. Same thing with the county. Same thing with the state, where you have campaign limits. What ends up happening is you have an independent expenditure. People contribute to that independent expenditure, and the voters have very little visibility as to who actually paid for, the $12 million, $16 million supervisorial campaign, or the mayoral seat in Los Angeles, because it's really an independent expenditure campaign that fueled the election. And I frankly don't want to see that. Anyone who is interested to know where our campaigns are funded can go to our city website, and then we have to provide answers as to why we did accept money from whoever it may be. And that's the way the system should work. And the voters should have the opportunity to support a challenge against any one of us as incumbents and contribute to campaigns as they have for those of us who've stood for office. And so, I view this as an important item. And my opinion has always been the same, that campaign limits are artificial, and they're really incumbent protection measures, because it's very hard for a challenger to go around and at whatever the limit is, raise the money against an incumbent who does have access to a lot more people, who has raised money in the past from people. And so, some people would say, well, the natural step for an incumbent would be to support campaign limits, because then it limits the people who can challenge any one of us. And I don't think we should limit that. I think any one of us should be subject to a challenge at any point in time. And we shouldn't artificially limit it. And we should also not push campaign contributions as they do at the state level, at the city of Los Angeles level, at the county level, into independent expenditures where the public has little to no visibility as to who's funding those campaigns. And so that's why I intend to support the reading of this first ordinance. We have Vice Mayor Wilson, who is in the queue. I don't know if Ms. Williams was first. Okay, Ms. Williams was first, and then Vice Mayor Wilson, followed by Ms. Rivas.
Thank you, Mayor, for your comments. And we talked about this at Rules and Procedures, and I'm very supportive of your comments. I think part of the challenge is that there's a lot of we're not all on the same page with the information. I think the public may be looking at different information sources. So I did want to just have, I'm going to ask the city clerk a couple of questions just to clarify, so we're all on the same page. But when we talk about independent expenditures, what we file on the city website are the forms that we as candidates and the expenditure accounts that file in Pasadena file online. But if there is an independent expenditure account, where do they file and how would anybody find that information? This is the challenge that the mayor is pointing out.
So, and as the filing officer for the city and for local campaigns, I'm really focused more on the candidates and their committees. When I go through the nomination process, we talk about that with the candidates. When it comes to independent expenditures, there's requirements that are required by the FPBC that they file Form 461s, Form 462s. The Form 462 is actually the verification of independent expenditure, and then the Form 496 is something that they would give to us to say that they made an independent expenditure. If you go to our website, I pulled up some samples. There are some samples of 496s that are filed with us. But some of the committees are at state level. So when we see them, we ask, are you going to file the Form 460s with us? And they say they file it at the state. So some of it doesn't come to us. I don't actually know a lot about independent expenditures other than when I see them occurring and when they file with our office. But we generally just focus in on the candidates and their campaigns.
Okay.
If that answers the question.
Yes, that does exactly. And so I think this is the challenge that we're trying to deal with. We got a lot of public comments and, I read every one of them. I'm really grateful that everybody submitted, but we still don't have a solution to the independent expenditure problem. And the concern is that if we put a limit, it will make that problem worse. So and that's sort of a state level problem. If you wanted to know who spent money on our campaigns on independent expenditures, there's no way you could find it unless you knew the committee's name or their number and went to the Secretary of State's huge website and looked them up. So there's no way you would know. We probably still don't even know who spent money in our campaigns. For IEs, I have no idea. So that's the first part. And then secondly, there was also some information out there that I saw that we were eliminating our campaign limits. And so just to clarify for the public, we've never had campaign donation limits. And how long has that been the case, or has that
Well,
always been
until
case?
the new law was set in place, there had not been previously campaign limits to local campaigns in Pasadena. We hadn't had that yet.
Okay. So we've been operating, all of us got here, most of us got here without campaign limits. So that's kind of been the status quo in Pasadena. We're not eliminating something that was here before. So thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, and one thing I would add is, when we moved to the state elections, it did increase participation, but it also increased the cost of a campaign. Last time we had a mayoral election, for example, before the last election, there were 19,000 participants. This time around, there were a lot more than that, four times 75,000. Yeah. So there are a lot more, and that's going to be the case in every city council district as well. And that's a good thing, to have more voter participation. But, people have to be, again, able to raise the money to reach the voters, whether it's against any one of us as incumbents or an open seat, whatever it may be. It's democracy. Ms. Rivas, or I'm sorry, Vice Mayor Wilson, followed by Ms. Rivas.
I'm happy to let Ms. Rivas go first. Go ahead, Jess.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for letting me make one last pitch to maybe change some minds, but we'll see how successful I am. I want to start by thanking the public for their participation through email, and we'll hear from them tonight. I was pretty dismayed that there wasn't a single public comment when this last came before us. This is a really important issue, and so their participation is vital to this process. I also want to, of course, thank the ad hoc committee for looking into this issue and articulating the position that both Mayor Gordo and Councilmember Williams have set out tonight, which is that if you set out or if you establish a limit that is too low, you don't get rid of big money in politics, you just shift it to IEs, which are much less transparent. But ultimately, I think that is an argument in favor of finding a reasonable limit and not necessarily an argument in favor of no limit. So I would strongly urge all of our colleagues to vote no on today's draft ordinance. This will allow the state limits to stay in place, which have been in place since January 1st of this year. And to remind everyone, those are $4,900. I think it does strike a good balance between allowing, on the one hand, candidates to raise enough funds to run their campaigns, which I'm learning firsthand are very expensive right now. And then on the other hand, avoiding those really outsized big contributions that potentially undermine public confidence in our electoral process and also in us as elected officials ourselves, unfortunately. I would also note that voting no tonight wouldn't necessarily prevent us or prohibit us in any way from revisiting this issue in the future. The ad hoc committee can continue to review and investigate this issue. And finally, I would also point out that I believe the public comment that we've received already by email and that we're going to hear tonight, which appears to be overwhelmingly against the proposed ordinance, I think really is indicative of the temperature of the community at large. And I believe if we do adopt this ordinance, we will be profoundly out of step with what the residents hope to see from our city and how they want our elections to be run. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Rivas. Vice Mayor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor, and I appreciate Councilmember Rivas's comments. And I was not here when this came through last time. I happened to be on vacation and missed the topic. I did watch the tape to have the benefit of discussion. And, having, run a very expensive campaign myself, I made a determination not to take checks for any election more than $5,000. And so I'm mindful of the expense of a campaign. And I do think Councilmember Rivas mentions, it's a balancing act. If it was $500 or $250, I probably would think that would be too little. I do think these campaigns have gotten ridiculously expensive. Obscenely expensive is probably a better word. And I know this doesn't fix the problem, but I think when we have an opportunity to start, nibbling away at the apple, individual contributions, and I think I would challenge our committee to think about what can be done around IEs and other strategies. I know other cities have implemented limitations around other financing sources. So I think as a standalone move, this $4,900 per campaign, and I understand that, if you have a spouse, that's 2 times $4,900, so that's 10 grand times, 2 election cycles, a primary and a runoff, that's $20,000. It's starting to sound like big money. And I think actually, I'm pretty sure most people around the dais don't take checks more than 5 grand. And I do think it's a reasonable balance. And I think I would love to see our committee do more work on campaign finance reform. I think, Mayor, your campaign was incredibly expensive. And I think that does create a sense of discomfort with the voters and discourages other people from running. So Jess, at least you'll have one partner in today's vote. So you're welcome. But it is part of a bigger issue, and I think it's hard to think about this in a vacuum. So I would want to take the mayor's lead around what other aspects of campaign finance reform can we continue to work at to, and I think I heard Councilmember Hampton raise some questions during our last meeting that also should be pursued. So I don't think it's a one and done type question. So I too think this is an important topic and don't want to hamstring ourselves, but think the state's guidance actually is appropriate for once in this matter. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Wilson. And in terms of independent expenditures, I'll look to the city attorney. I mean, can we restrict independent expenditures in the political process?
And I know there's some case law, and we can take a look at that. And I know with the Citizens United, that definitely does limit what the council can do in this area. So I think the legislature did try to do what they can, but I think there are some limitations with Citizens United.
My understanding is we're very limited, if at all, because it's Yeah, it's free speech. And that's the
Well, why
concern
did I think
have.
I thought I saw a reference, and I don't know if it was one of the public comments about San Diego actually having more comprehensive election finance reform that extended beyond individual contributors. Javon, are you aware of
PACs,
that?
political action committees.
Making contributions.
Okay, so it's PACs, not independent expenditures.
We can, we can yeah, two different things. So PAC contribution is a political action committee contribution versus the independent expenditure.
Right, a political action committee who makes a donation, they report it on a 497, whereas if a political action committee does an independent expenditure, that's reported on a 496, and I believe that's not subject. I'm not an attorney, so I'm not gonna, but that's my understanding.
We can, these are, there are a number of issues that I think are facing the city that will require broader discussion, and this is one of them. Some people have asked us to look at the form of our municipal government. I can tell you that I'm not interested in changing it, but it may be a discussion that we want to have. There are a number of issues that we should have in a broader context, as the Vice Mayor suggests. Ms. Williams?
And even if we pass this tonight, we can also revisit it at a later point as well.
Absolutely.
So because we do have an election coming up, I know we have a deadline.
Yeah.
So we have an election next year where we can sort of see how this plays out and see that the cities that did put in limits, see how they went, and then we can also revisit this at some later point as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, public comment?
So in terms of correspondence received, the city clerk's office received 33 letters, one of which was signed by 140 people advocating for campaign finance reform, expressing strong concern and opposition to the proposed ordinance, stating that campaign contribution limits allow for transparency, a level playing field, and public trust in the city's democratic process, with a couple of letters citing concerns with the PPOA, Pasadena Police Officers Association, and its campaign contributions to a few council members. And with that, the first, oh, we're gonna,
How many cards are there? The council still has close.
8, 12, 16, 22 cards are submitted, 22 cards are submitted. So 2 minutes?
2 minutes?
Okay, the first speaker is Ellen Finkelpearl, followed by Professor Denise Robb. Ms. Finkelpearl? Hello?
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead. You have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, okay, thank you. So as Councilmember Rivas said at the August 16th meeting, when the council first discussed drafting an ordinance codifying the longstanding practice in Pasadena of placing no limits on campaign contributions, there was no public comment. But people were away, COVID was limiting our engagement. But now that the city council's proposal has been brought into the light, there is strong opposition in the community. And as was already mentioned, a group of us delivered an open letter with over 100 signatures from Pasadena residents and at least 40 from neighboring cities. And the issue is also being discussed on the media. Everyone I have spoken with finds this proposal regressive and incomprehensible in light of increasing awareness of the harm done by undue influence from large donors. We need less money in politics, not more. The California state limit, which I've heard people saying is reasonable, seems to me very high. I don't understand what, I guess I've heard tonight people talking about how expensive campaigns are, but this seems like a lot of money to me compared to what an individual like me could contribute to anyone's campaign. Also, Mayor Gordo talked about the way that supposedly contribution limits would favor incumbents, which may or may not be backed up by evidence.
30
But
seconds.
I think that also, sorry, okay, that argument neglects the real point that after election, the council member is, or maybe just will appear to be, more indebted to the entities that contributed $15,000 or $50,000 to the individual who contributed $50. Also, the candidates who are supported by large contributors are more likely to be the ones who support those interests. The wealthy maintain power. That's not complex reasoning. I urge you to turn down this undemocratic ordinance and institute instead reasonable limits. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Denise Robb, Julie McCune has the speaker card, but we can't find her in the meeting, so then it'll go to Una Lee Jost.
Hi.
Hi, Professor Robb, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Professor Robb and Professor of Political Science. My doctoral research at UC Irvine is actually on elections. And I agree with my own city councilman, Councilman Andy Wilson. We've got to get money out of politics. Having no limits is detrimental to democracy. And even before Citizens United, when they said money equals free speech, you know what that means? That means the poor people are mute. The candidate who spends the most money usually wins. Research backs this up. More than 90% of candidates who spent the most won from 2000 to 2016, except for one election cycle in which 86% of them won. So research has shown that it's not so much the general, it's actually the primary. The primary election is strongly predicted by the person who has the most money. And actually it has to do with who you even hear from or know. You may not candidate because of the person who has the most money is the one who gets the most attention. I ran for office, and you know the first thing they ask you when, you know this, you all know this, from endorsement interviews, newspapers and organizations, how much money did you raise? So do you really think $4,900 is too low?
30 seconds.
We've got to take care of this by February. South Pasadena, $1,000 was, you don't have to wait. They adopted it 4 years ago. And Arcadia, we have 140,000 people. Los Angeles has 4 million, and they have $800 for city council, $1,600 for city attorney and mayor. So do the right thing. We're watching you. We're listening to you. We're here, and we really want you to follow my councilman, Andy Wilson.
Thank you. Una Lee Jost, followed by Tracy Heverly. Go ahead.
Greetings. You can hear me?
Yes, 2 minutes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Greetings, I'm Una Lee Yost, District 4, Pasadena resident, local school advocate, and PUSD parent. I'm speaking in support of the open letter to Pasadena Mayor Victor Gordo and City Council members to lead Pasadena's fight for a truly inclusive government by implementing urgently needed campaign finance reform. The open letter was written in strong opposition to the proposed ordinance to codify no limits on campaign contributions, and it was signed by a growing coalition of over 100 Pasadena residents, concerned residents from over a dozen nearby cities, and several groups. The open letter outlines in detail why the community is calling on each of you to rescind the council's August 16 vote, instructing the preparation of an ordinance codifying into law unlimited campaign contributions from donors to city candidates, and place reasonable per contributor limits on direct funding of local campaigns in keeping with sensible surrounding cities like LA, Alhambra, and South Pasadena, as well as dozens of local jurisdictions across Southern California. For example, LA, with a population of almost 4 million, has an $800 limit as of 2020, in contrast to Pasadena's a population of only 140,000. The open letter highlights the importance of the First Amendment in the U.S. Bill of Rights and corollary rights in the California Constitution, which guarantees every American Californian the right to participate fully in the political process.
30 seconds.
Pasadena's local city government is not immune to the tremendous power of special interest money in politics that often drowns out the voice of everyday Pasadenans, threatening our constitutional right to participate fully in the political process and eroding the foundations of our entire democracy. Nonprofit public interest government reform organizations such as Campaign Legal Center, Brennan Center, Public Center, Citizen, Common Cause, and California Clean Money Campaign are all in consensus that in order to restore fairness to our political system, the passing and enforcing of strong campaign finance reforms is urgently needed to help guarantee a democracy responsive to the people,
Miss-
including
Ms.
placing
Yost,
reasonable
your
limits on
time has
political
expired.
Thank you, Ms. Yost.
Okay, let me just finish.
Next.
Complete transparency of campaign spending and public financing elections. So I urge you, council
Ms.
members, to lead the fight for truly inclusive Pasadena.
Thank you, Ms. Yost.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy Heverly, followed by Emogene Campbell, followed by Kathy Kunze. I forget it. Tracy?
Yes,
Sorry.
hello, it's Tracy. Thank you
Go ahead.
for hearing all of our comments. I believe there's very little in life that's black and white, and I respect and trust that each of you serve on council because you care for the community that you serve, and that I truly believe that you want to serve beyond your own time in office. And my original ask was going to be to understand your rationale for adopting unlimited contributions. So I respect and appreciate the insight, because I understand it's not black and white. But I have to admit that the argument feels weak, and I would highly consider or urge you to consider that other reforms potentially are necessary in order to move us in the ultimate right direction. But giving up because there are other loopholes does not feel like the right reason to adopt unlimited donations. We know that disproportionate contributions bring unfair advantages, and I urge you tonight, make this not part of Pasadena's future. Thank you.
Thank you. Emogene Campbell, followed by Kathy Kuniz, followed by Rocco Robinson. Ms. Campbell?
Hi,
Go ahead.
my name is Jane Campbell, and I'm a PUSD parent and volunteer here in Pasadena. And I have recently just learned about this issue, and $4,900 as a contribution seems like a fair and high amount considering the surrounding areas around us. I think voting no would put more trust into the voters of Pasadena and secure our democratic elections. And with all the issues that council has on the agenda, I think this would be one that we could create reform and better limits for candidates and change how we vote and participate in the process.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bringing Kathy Kuniz. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. If you want to unmute. There you go.
Kathy Kunis.
Kunis?
Hello, can you
Sorry
hear
about
me?
that. Yes, we can. Go ahead, Ms. Kunis.
My name is Kathy Kunis, and I am reading a prepared statement from Martha Zavala, President of the League of Women Voters, Pasadena area. We are against unlimited amounts to city council campaigns by a single person or entity. If anything, we would advocate for a much lower limit than that allowed under California law, that of $4,900. Anything more than that in a city this size is undesirable and unnecessary. In fact, we were co-sponsors of the charter amendment in Alhambra in 2020 that changed the election of city council members to by district and limited campaign contributions to a maximum of $250 per election from an individual. It also prohibited contributions from developers, contractors, and political action committees. In Pasadena, the city council districts are relatively small and conducive to door-to-door campaigns. This is the one reliable way to meet the voters and personally ask for their support. It actually doesn't take a lot of money to campaign this way, and many small donations give candidates an indication of the kind of support they have in their district. No limits on campaign contributions provide lots of opportunities for abuse, especially abuse of access, allowing developers, contractors for city service
30 seconds.
to give unlimited funds to candidates invites them to expect special favors like support for their project or their bid on a contract. We urge you to reject this additional to the municipal code. There are better ways to prevent corruption from taking hold in Pasadena. Thank you.
Thank
Can I-
you.
City Clerk, could you just remind people that we have a TPA in place in the city of Pasadena already, where we cannot receive campaign contributions from developers who we will see their projects or be voting on them,
Right,
or have voted on?
the Taxpayer Protection Act limits contributions from any person or business that a council member has voted to approve or convey a value of $25,000 or more. So that could be a contract, excuse me, that could be a project. So anything where a council member votes yes, that person or that company goes on the list. And if a council member receives a contribution from that person and finds that on the list, they have to return that contribution. So and then there's the pre-contractual blackout list. So if a developer or a contract is in negotiations with the city, then they go on a pre-contractual blackout list, and they are also barred from making donations to campaign to candidates running for city council office. So the next speaker is Rocco Robinson, followed by Dr. Andrea Davis. That's *6 to unmute. Go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear
Yes.
you. Go ahead.
That's great. Okay, hello all. I'll be very brief. I am in total opposition to the proposed no contributions limitations, contributions. I think the previous reasons given by have been excellent, so I just want to add my voice to the opposition. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Andrea Davis, followed by Gabriel Ramirez. Go ahead, Ms. Davis. Hi, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm the owner of Greenhouse Therapy Center at Lake and Walnut, where I employ 40 mental health providers, and I'm really grateful to speak along with other people who've written in about this and are speaking this evening. I've read the correspondence. I agree with many of those eloquent writers, and particularly agree with their shock and stupefaction, actually. Campaign finance reform has been such a high priority on both sides of the aisle for decades and just can't seem to get done at a federal level, but we could do it here. And getting big money out of politics, I think we all sound like we agree on that issue. Pasadena having no restrictions on campaign donations goes in the exact opposite direction, if you ask me. It does allow the wealthy class to influence city policies by donating whatever amount they wish to their favorite candidate. And unlimited donations invites, I think, greed. And we've seen the corruption, which has plagued nearby cities in Southern California that I don't have to name. I think that large and possibly obscene private campaign donations by wealthy residents really prevents the access, the justice, and the equity that we've been all listening to your care and concern for that all evening.
30 seconds.
Okay, $4,900 is way too high in comparison with the local progressive cities around us, such as South Pass or Alhambra. And I support the Vice Mayor's recommendation tonight to have the council really truly look at and make some progress on campaign finance reform here, especially fixing the low transparency, independent expenditures problem. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Gabriel Ramirez, followed by Heavenly Hughes, followed by Michelle White. Mr. Ramirez, go ahead.
Good evening, City Council, Pasadena residents, and those who are actually watching. I'm an alternate for the Los Angeles County Democratic Party Central Committee, and I'm also an appointed California Democratic Party Assembly District 49, and a former City Council candidate for 2020 in the City of El Monte. So the reason I'm talking today is against opposition of this agenda that is happening, and there's a lot of loopholes based on what the mayor, Victor Gordo, was explaining on it, and it does not make one sense of it. As far as in an example where the city of El Monte, one of the mayor from Pasadena, allies was Andre Quintero, former mayor of El Monte, and Jerry Velasco for city council members. The same thing, they implemented the same policies as Victor Gordo. The community voted him out because they put up policies where it was not going to be for the interest of the community. But again, it was a loophole on that campaign finance reform. But now going back to it here is, it can lead to different types of, in different ways of corruption, not just the special interest, but also can be influence. So that means special interests can send out multiple their alternates to donate. So when you're coming up to endorsements, you know, it really contradicts, because that's when we ask you the question. So should you decide to vote in favor of it,
30 seconds.
November will be coming up, and the voters will vote you out. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
Thank you. Heavenly Hughes, followed by Michelle White. We have Stephen Gibson, who has not checked in, and so after Mr. Gibson would be Sam Morrissey. Ms. Hughes, are you ready? There you go.
Hello, can you all hear me?
We can. Go ahead. 2 minutes.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. 2 minutes. Hello?
Hello, Mayor Victor Gordo and City Council. I keep hearing the word corruption. So are you guys inviting more corruption by asking for unlimited campaign funding? Or is this just another like PR move to waste all of our time talking about something that you guys already know the community is not going to go for? And are you guys going to listen to the voices of the community? I agree 100% with the voices that I've heard speak already, talking about how this could lead into further corruption. We've been talking about the corruption of the Pasadena Police Department, and that hasn't been addressed. And now we want to vote on something that can bring more corruption into our community. So of course I oppose. Mayor Victor Gordo, you already know the community is going to oppose. You know that this limits the voices of those who don't have long money. And be sure that diversity and inclusion is in your mind when making these decisions. Include those voices that don't have money to buy you as elected officials. Just do the work. Do the work. Get out there and meet the community. Get out there and we keep talking about community engagement. Go
25 seconds.
And canvas the community and meet the people. You don't have to get paid or bought. Stop the corruption. Again, stop the corruption when it comes to police brutality and cover up and murder. Let's just stop all corruption. How about that? Let's start there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Michelle White, followed by Sam Morrissey, followed by Cheryl Arger. Ms. White, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I think it's pretty clear that your public wants you to rethink reasonable limits rather than adopting the ordinance that is set forth tonight. I have not heard one member of the public in support of this, either by letter or their oral contributions. I am also concerned about conflicts of interest that we have not addressed. I'm thankful for the kinds of conflicts that have been set forth with regard to developers, but I think that we should also have in place a rule against accepting any proposals or any monies rather from the police union or any other employee union. The bottom line is that the city council is the ultimate employer, an ultimate supervisor, an ultimate oversight body for each of these unions and the members that they have. So they should not be accepting contributions from people over whom they're going to exercise some kind of oversight.
25 seconds.
I'm also concerned about the possibility as a renter. I'm also concerned about the possibility of the council accepting what could amount to a bribe, in other terms, from large developers, whether or not they have something pending before the council at the time.
Ms.
or
White, your
whether or
time
not-
has expired.
Oh, okay.
If you want to wrap it up.
So, yes, I am, as a renter, I want you to be fair to the 62% of the population that is represented in Pasadena. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam Morrissey, followed by Cheryl Arger, followed by Jill Shook. Mr. Morrissey, go ahead.
Hi, this is Sam Morrissey. I am Sam Morrissey. I'm the immediate past chair of the Transportation Advisory Commission here in Pasadena, and I'm a resident. I was shocked to learn of this proposed ordinance, and I wasn't surprised to hear that there were no comments in August when this was brought forward. Our money has spoiled national, state, and even county level government. I believe that local government is the last bastion of true democracy. It requires our council members really to go out there and meet the people they represent. I'm thankful that Steve Madison is my council member, and I'm able to speak with him whenever I want to about issues that concern me. You know, without any limits on campaign contributions, we would be bombarded with signs, billboards, bus wrap ads, et cetera, instead of candidates going door to door and meeting the people that they represent. I think that as I read the current state law, I've heard numbers thrown around that anywhere between $3,000 and $4,900 per person should be sufficient for a campaign to be run where you're meeting the actual people you represent. And you know, the question about independent expenditures, I did some quick looking at the Fair Political Practices Commission's website, which is easily accessible. And I'll say there's two big differences here. Independent expenditure committees are not based on contributions, and two, they cannot be directed by any candidates. So it's just like a political action committee. It's supposed to be a message independent of the candidate. So I think it's somewhat of an obfuscation to put the independent expenditures committees out there as a concern. So in the end, I urge the council members to vote no on this ordinance, vote no on the second reading to be read at the next meeting. I would be glad to have council revisit this if $3,000 to $4,900 per person is not sufficient to run a campaign. But I think the idea of unlimited campaign expenditures
20 seconds.
is just outlandish and will throw us into the mix of what we see at the national and state level. So thank you very much. I yield my time.
Thank you. Cheryl Arger, followed by Jill Shook, followed by Alan Shea. Ms. Arger, go ahead.
We have all witnessed the impact of corporate campaigns donations firsthand in the state of California, where senators and assembly members have taken donations from the fossil fuel industry, unions, and utilities consistently vote in accordance with their special interests, not for what's good for their voting base. My own assembly member is one of those who has taken oodles of money from fossil fuels, plastics, the utilities, and he continues to support fossil fuel utilities and fracking and polluting with his votes. To even consider getting a candidate to run against him, I know I would have to find over $900,000 in donations. It is so wrong. And the decisions made by the bot assembly member are not only so wrong, but bad for our very environment. On the flip side, I've worked on several campaigns that won't take money from special interests and instead try to get large volumes of small donations. So the ability to raise funds to compete with bot candidates is limited. This is unfair. These are the candidates that will represent the populace, but it is so hard for them to amass large amounts of donations. Berkeley has campaign contributions limited to
30 seconds.
$250 from individual corporations. I'll switch to the end. Okay, we need to not approve this. We need to change. We need to add individual caps and total caps, and maybe use and improve transparency. And maybe we should use like the medium income at like 1% or 10% of their income as a measure to what the individual contributions should be. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Jill Shook, followed by Alan Shea, followed by Wes Ruderman. Jill, if you can unmute. Having trouble tonight. I know we had you in earlier.
Let's go to the next speaker and we'll come back to Ms. Shook.
All right. Alan Shea, followed by Wes Ruderman. *6 to unmute, Mr. Shea. There you go. Go ahead. 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mayor Gordo and the honorable city council members. I truly agree with all of the voices of the community that this agenda should be voted down. I think a true focus in our community now is really about trust and how we can show that we are actually accounting instead of trying to smoke screen what we want to do, especially leading into an election cycle. So I would strongly hope that the city council will vote this down. We do not need additional focus with corruption. We're trying to figure out how we're going to trust our elected officials, and especially with a new model similar to what we're working on with the Police Oversight Commission. We've got to figure this out. So I would highly say let's vote it down. What we have in the past have worked to get the right people in office. So we can continue that model until we figure out what will be appropriate to make sure the community will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Wes Ruderman, followed by Amory Thomas. Go ahead, Mr. Ruderman.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. I think it really is worth reiterating a statement shared by a political scientist earlier that the candidate who spends the most money usually wins. As you know, Pasadena already has some of the most expensive council races in Los Angeles County. And as you also know, $100,000 for a local city council race is no longer unusual in this city. That figure is, of course, far more than in surrounding communities as well, even within some of our larger cities. I think I see the concern about independent expenditures, but it won't be solved by allowing or continuing to allow donations of any
an ad hoc committee recommended the adoption of an ordinance that provides for no dollar limits. And it noted that local disclosures of campaign contributions already provide sunshine and transparency regarding campaign donations. That statement is relevant to the campaign finance disclosure laws, but it is not relevant to the purpose of campaign contribution limits. The reason for campaign contribution limits is to avoid undue influence, political corruption, and the appearance of corruption involving campaign donors. The majority of this council seems to have forgotten that. Simple disclosure of contributions is not enough. It does not address the issue of undue influence. Only Vice Mayor Wilson and Councilmember Rivas have even mentioned undue influence and/or undermining voter confidence. Please listen to your constituents, represent our interests, including the interests of those who do not have the substantial funds the PPOA has to donate to your political campaigns. Show us that you care about avoiding undue influence in your decision-making and the appearance of corruption. Reject the proposed ordinance and come back with actual limits on campaign contributions consistent with AB 571. Thank you. And thank you to those of you who are showing you are listening to public comment.
Thank you. Pat Amsbury, followed by Tyler Smith, followed by Anthony Manousos. Mr. Amsbury, go ahead.
Thanks. Good evening, Mayor, council members. Thank you very much for having me tonight. I think it's clear that we all agree that we need to get money out of politics. I sat here and crossed through 75 of my bullet points that were already covered and covered so eloquently by many. We need to get money out of politics, especially out of local politics. I mean, for example, I can and I do max out as a contributor to Congressman Schiff because he deserves it. And why would we spend more money on a local mayoral election? It makes no sense. It's going to drown out the voices of small groups and individuals. It's antithetical to the zeitgeist of this time in our great city to do something that's so akin to Citizens United. It's inequitable. It will unfairly create a high barrier of entry, and it's very problematic from an economic and racial justice standpoint. And I don't want our city to be known for being out of step economically and with racial justice. Limiting contributions will create a more diverse candidate pool. It'll create the opportunities for more candidates to have a voice. It'll encourage
30 seconds.
Right, progressive candidates that will actually create real progressive change in this city for a change. We know Citizens United was one of the worst things that ever happened. Consider also the people in our community without a voice that aren't here speaking tonight. We must create a limit to contributions to create a level playing field. I encourage you to be a diverse government. I'll reserve the conversation of term limits for later. I strongly urge you to reject this ordinance, and I yield the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Tyler Smith, followed by Anthony Manousos, followed by Julie McCune, followed by Jill Shook.
Hello.
Go
Can
ahead,
you hear
Mr.
me?
Smith. Yes, go ahead. 2 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to thank the council for giving us the space to talk, and I want to especially thank the council members who are opposed to this ordinance. As a citizen of Pasadena, the president of the First Unitarian Church of Los Angeles, I am also in opposition to this ordinance. It seems the argument that unlimited contributions can help new candidates against incumbents seems to be cherry picking an argument that is only for the approval of this ordinance. Even if that argument was true, it seems like you could just as easily argue the opposite. As has been mentioned, we live in the era of post-Citizens United. The narrative of consolidation of power and unchecked cronyism is sadly far too rampant in our politics, and it continues to eat away at the fabric of our democracy. So in a time where income inequality continues to be growing, especially in the city, I really urge council members to vote against unlimited campaign contributions and to look into reasonable contribution limits. Not to be cheesy, but let Pasadena be a principled city, a city that symbolizes equal voice, equal representation, and equal opportunity. Really a city that we can all be proud of. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anthony Manousos, followed by Julie McCune, followed by Jill Shook. *6 to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead. 2 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Great.
Yes.
So I am strongly opposed to the idea of unlimited campaign contributions. I'd like first to respond to the mayor's claim that campaign contribution limits disadvantage those running against incumbents. I'd like to see what evidence he has for this assertion. The National Voting Rights Institute and the State PERG Democracy Program released a study that found there is no support for the notion that campaign contribution limits hurt challengers. In fact, according to that study, contribution limits can work to reduce the financial bias that traditionally works in favor of the incumbents. So I think you need to read this study. I'll give you a link for it in my letter. If your constituents are telling you loud and clear, we need campaign finance reform here in Pasadena. And I want to commend Council members Rivas and Wilson for listening to the voice of the people. People want money taken out of politics. According to the Pew Research Center, 77% of Americans say there should be limits on the amount of money individuals and groups can spend on campaigns. Tonight, we've heard 100% are opposed to unlimited funding of campaigns. And I'm shocked to hear that some city council members feel they can't be elected unless they receive unlimited funds from wealthy elites, as well as from the police association and fire department.
30 seconds.
I'm especially concerned about how much council members received from the police association during the last election, $87,000. So I urge you not to take money from the police association when you run for office. And I urge you to lower the limit on campaign contributions to comply with state law, or better yet, lower the limit to that of South Pasadena or Alhambra.
Thank you. Julie McCune, followed by Jill Shook. Ms. McCune? There you go.
Okay, I'm you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Thank you. Greetings to the City Council members and Mayor Gordo. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters. I'm also a member of this community all my life. I strongly support limits on campaign contributions. Our community needs campaign finance reform. Our local elected city government leaders ought to listen to all voices and ought to represent all voices, not just the wealthy donors. Let's get rid of dark money and its loopholes. Let's reform and improve the way campaigns are financed. Please explore the methods that are being implemented in Seattle. This undemocratic ordinance would allow, the one that is proposed here in Pasadena, it would allow local campaigns to be conducted without contribution limits. So I am opposed to this ordinance. Vote no tonight. I agree with Council members Rivas and Wilson. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And Jill Shook? She is. Jill? There you go.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, thank you. To clear my throat there. I just want to thank you for bringing this to our attention, and just let you know how much I love you and I love our democracy. It's an amazing experiment that's worked for as long as it has because we can all vote and you know, not biased by how much money we earn. One of the things that is indeed destroying our precious democracy today is money in politics. So I have to admit, it was quite shocking to me that such an ordinance was even being considered. So please refuse this lie that is destroying our nation. As a person of faith, I seek to live by by this Christian, pardon me. I seek to live by the Christian scriptures. I love Matthew 6:33 and what it says. Some of you may know it, to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And in Spanish, it says, and to seek his justice, justicia. So to seek those things that matter to God, to love justice, to love mercy, equity, inclusion of all people, no matter their income. And then the promise that's given as a result of that verse.
30 seconds.
Is that all these things will be added unto you. So I believe that if you do what's right, that you will get elected if that's what you're called to do. And so I pray for you. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of our city. I just hope you will do everything to do the right thing and get money out of politics. Thanks.
And the last speaker is Ryan Bell. Mr. Bell, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. I also rise to oppose this ordinance tonight. When I have to be honest, when I first heard about it, it almost sounded like a joke. When I first started doing my research to run for city council, I was surprised to find that there were no limits on campaign contributions, and was encouraged that the state was going to take action on this, and possibly the city would pose some limits on campaign contributions. I find Mayor Gordo's assertion that campaign limits favor incumbents to be a complete red herring. I frankly don't see anybody but lobby groups making that point. And it would be interesting to know where the data is on that. I remember distinctly that Mayor Gordo campaigned on transparency and listening to the community. He set himself apart as someone who would listen to the community in a way that was much better than his predecessor. And I think tonight is an opportunity to demonstrate that, that you are willing to do that. These comments and assertions about the lack of need for campaign finance limits are like far right wing talking points.
30 seconds.
And it was clear from the discussion among the council members that even you are unclear about what's possible and what's not possible. And the council is always so cautious to make sure that they understand all the ins and outs of an issue before they make a decision. Why rush to make this decision when you don't really even understand yet the implications of the decision that you're making? And and I just think the fact that we can't make it perfect is not a reason to not limit campaign contributions in light of all the very smart input from the community that you've heard tonight. And I'm honored to be able to be among those people who have shared.
Mr. Bell, your time has expired.
Concern about this this proposed ordinance. Please follow the lead of Councilmember Rivas and Wilson and vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. That completes public comment on this item.
Okay. Questions or comments from any member of the Mr. Masuda? Mr. Masuda, did you have your hand up? Gene, your virtual hand is up. I'm not sure if.
Are you calling on me, Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I wasn't sure. I really appreciate what all we're talking about, and so I have some questions. If we did vote this issue down, what would be amount of contributions, what would be that limit? Would it be the 4,900 automatically? And I'll tell you, I was really moved by the people that said that if you really want to run for office, you walk from door to door. Well, I know all about that. So I guess that's my number one question right now. Is that reasonable amount will be $4,900 like the state's limit? Is that what would happen if we voted this down?
Councilmember Masuda, this is Javon. Yes, you would default to the state.
I see. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm leaning to do that now, and I appreciate what Council Members Rivas and Wilson have said, and I'm very appreciative what the members of the public have said, and I gotta say, I have to agree with a lot of what they did say. So thank you so much.
Now, the attorney, would that include a contribution from an individual candidate to himself or herself?
I don't believe it would limit individual contributions, and I think to the mayor's earlier question before public comment, I do believe that sort of for independent expenditures, Citizens United does prevent the city from getting involved in that. And also what the state law allows is basically, does the council want to do anything with regard to campaign contributions, period, not with respect to independent expenditures. So the question for the council really is just for campaign contributions here, and not personal expenditures either.
Not personal or independent expenditures.
Correct.
And so somebody could come in and say, I'm going to contribute money and run their own campaign and essentially get around it if they had their own money.
On their own, but I think the important thing is the state law said cities can do by ordinance sort of a limited scope of things.
Okay. Next is in the queue is Mr. Madison, followed by Mr. Hampton.
Thanks, Mayor. I mean, I have to confess, the speakers have gotten my attention on this too. I do think this is a complex issue. And a couple of things that were stated in some of the remarks, I think, are not completely accurate. I mean, for example, independent expenditures, I think, have to be reported. Certainly if they are by certain donors. And I'd be interested in hearing from staff about that, or I can research that on my own time, I guess. But one thing that is compelling here is I do agree with the mayor that limits help incumbents, because the incumbents will have a natural ability to be able to raise from a broader cross-section. And I'd ask my colleagues to consider also whether, if, for example, a member from a very affluent district is running against a member from a district that might not be so advantaged economically, does that member from the affluent district have an advantage that is magnified with contribution limits? So in other words, it might be one member might be able to go and get 100 contributions of $2,000 or $2,500, but for another member, there may not be that kind of ability, but there could be the ability to have a couple of especially successful supporters provide more financing than that, so that that person can get his message out. I think what a lot of the speakers are communicating is their unease and discomfort with the fact that money does help politicians get their message out there, but that's way beyond the scope of anything the Pasadena City Council can be able to do. I mean, that's just the nature of political contests. So, but I think we need to study this. I do have a question, I guess, for staff, which is I'm recalling some urgency that we had to act on this, lest the state rules would automatically be applied to us.
The state, So this is Mark Johnson, City Clerk. So the state laws are in effect as we speak. So $4,900 is the current limits. I think the urgency was related to the upcoming 2022 election, and that there were candidates that had declared and were starting to campaign. And so there was wanting to be some clarity of whether the council wanted to keep the state laws or put into effect its own law, which was allowed under the law that was passed. And then in relation to the independent expenditures, yes, we do receive a report. It's a 496 report, but oftentimes what I was trying to say was that if it's a state committee and they're making an independent expenditure, those committees filed their Form 460s with all of the contributions that they received to make their independent expenditures with the state, unless there's a certain threshold when it comes to that. So it's a little complicated, and I don't know the law perfectly, so I don't want to get too far out on my skis on this. But there are some instances where committees, political action committees that are known as state committees because they make contributions in other areas, they file with the state. They don't necessarily file with us, even though we'll ask them to file with us if they're active in our election. So we've run into that situation with certain committees. I hope
But
that clarifies that.
information is publicly available. I mean, it wouldn't be very hard to run the name of a candidate and find those expenditures.
Certainly, the independent expenditures, you could see what they are spending money on and whose campaign they're spending money on. That's posted on our website. So we have independent expenditure reports on our website. But in terms of contributions that political action committee had received from its members to make that independent expenditure, that may not necessarily be on our website. You may have to go to the state's website to find it, and that's a little bit of another search.
And Mr. Madison, that's the key, is who's funding the independent expenditure that's then making, Pasadenans for, more transparency, maybe a group, but it's, based out of Sacramento, and nobody knows who's contributing to that. I've seen it in the city of Los Angeles, I've seen it in the county, and I've seen it in the state. And the point that you're highlighting is, in some of our districts, city council districts, for example, I can recall people saying, someone from District 5 is not going to be elected mayor, and you recall that conversation, Mr. Madison, because they're at a disadvantage in exactly the point you're making, how many people in District 1, 3, or 5, or some of the other districts are able to write a check for a large amount. And so it leaves open the possibility that, future mayors would come from more affluent parts of the district for that reason. So
the city,
from the city for that reason. And it's having just lived it, I can tell you, it's real.
I guess I'm feeling, Mayor, like we need to do some more introspection here because, probably there's been some astroturfing going on, but it's hard to get a sample that is this unanimous in opposition, almost no matter what you do. So the fact that we've got this many comments tells me that we should probably have some more process around this, whether it's the ad hoc committee or perhaps we agendize it for a discussion at my committee, ledge policy, or the full council. I'm open to suggestions, but I am moved by the concern that many other speakers have about kind of a rush to judgment here, and that this happened swiftly and sort of under the dark of night sort of thing.
I'm more, the council has all of those options at its disposal. Mr. Wilson.
Yes, Mayor, and just to respond to Steve's concern, District 7 is fairly well heeled, and my concern goes the other direction. If you have a bunch of people who can write $5,000-$10,000 checks, lots of them. It does, I think, work the other way around. And you imagine if the limit was $100, then, you know, I think that would be the great equalizer. I'm not suggesting that. I do think if we default to the state, if I recall reading the staff report and watching the original presentation, it leaves the enforcement with the state versus writing our own rules and the FPPC. I always get concerned about having to take on enforcement capability that, you know, we don't necessarily have the infrastructure. So I think there's an argument. Obviously, if we do nothing, then there is no enforcement required. But if we start, you know, doing something too non-consistent with the state, and I assume the state, having read some of the legislative record, was pretty thoughtful in their work. I think there's an argument to conforming to what they have done. But I also think there's many of the speakers today realize this is kind of a whack-a-mole type thing, as if you push on the, you know, individuals, you get the PACs and you get the unions. And just like we're committed to being a leader in addressing climate change, I think we should commit ourselves to being a leader in good governance. And I think we should take this as the beginning of the conversation of how we become a leader and create the highest level possible of our residents, that we are committed to good governance. And I think the state's action has forced this conversation. But I would also, I don't want to kind of flood the issue, as Steve likes to say, but I think there are more moving pieces here. But I think we have an opening here to do the right thing. And once again, I stand by Councilmember Rivas, and it sounds like Councilmember Masuda, that we follow the lead from the state and continue to look at how we increase the confidence of our residents that we're committed to good government.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Wilson. Next in the queue is Ms. Williams.
Thank you, everyone, for the discussion. I think that the question that I have is for the city clerk. If the election of 2022, candidates are already collecting donations. So what is the timing here? When would we have to decide this? And then the sticky thing that we need to think about is if we study this longer and change course halfway through someone's election, does that then affect their ability to raise money and change the rules in the middle of their election? So I think we would either have to, I think it's almost too late for 2022 because they've already started raising money. I've already seen the fundraisers and they're probably already submitting their forms. I've seen some of the forms go in. So the question is, do we wait until after the election? Do we sort of set no limit now so people who are running now are not harmed? And then we revisit this next year and then set the limits before the next election, because I'm concerned about, and the people who are running right now, you know, can say something. I mean, some of them aren't on the council right now, so they don't really have a voice. But I'm concerned about changing horses midstream. And so I think the timing just needs to be considered here if we choose to study this more.
Councilmember Williams, currently the limit is $4,900. So anybody who is collecting campaign donations at this time is subject to that limit. So this would take away that limit, but they're currently operating under the $4,900 limit, and it's up to the council whether or not to proceed.
Okay, so given that, then it sounds like we have the option here to revert to the state's limit, and then revisit this later if we want to change that. But I still have not heard a solution to the independent expenditures problem. And so that is probably the one thing that I would like to see some solution to that, because it seems like the other cities that have put in limits haven't addressed that. And we don't really know how it gets affected by that. But that would be that's the one solution that I have not heard tonight that I would like to hear.
Turning to the city attorney, what are the, what can we do with independent expenditures?
For purposes of this action tonight, not a whole lot in the sense of state law limits what the council can do. And even aside from that, a Citizens United court case would have otherwise limited what the council could do.
It is interesting that at the state level, you know, and at the Board of Supervisors level, even before the Citizens United case, when they did adopt, and City of LA, when they did adopt campaign limits, they made no effort to limit independent expenditures. And, you know, the campaign contribution limits, for example, by the Board of Supervisors, that was adopted by the Board of Supervisors, but they completely left out the independent expenditure issue at the time. And, you know, you get Board of Supervisors seats that, you know, go upwards of $12–16 million. But the candidate only spends $1 to $2, maybe $3 million. The rest is independent expenditure. That's the problem that I see. Anyone else? Mr. Kennedy?
My position is if you have independent expenditures in any one race, no matter what the campaign limit is, that independent expenditure could be the driving force in the race itself. So I am actually supportive of what we had done for at least the last 60 years, and it seemingly worked. I remember when Hank Wilfong, African American in District 3, first ran and was successful. Loretta Glickman, African American in District 3, ran and was successful. Chris Holden, African American in District 3, ran and was successful. Isaac Richard, but even before Isaac Richard, there was a discriminatory election law, and Lois Richard ran in District 1, got 49.9% of the vote. And at that time, went citywide, and of course, citywide, she lost. And so the voters and Judge Manuel Real took up the matter and changed all of that. But the reality is that the diversity that we see on the council was caused by or engendered by what we had previously had, which was any one candidate could raise as much money as possible from the voters. And if we were to limit the amount in which one person could donate, I think federal law supersedes and could not be placed upon the candidate to fund their own election. For example, $100,000 that any one candidate, for example, could place into their election. Is that accurate or not, Mark Chomsky?
I'll make sure that the city attorney backs me up on this, but I believe that any candidate can contribute whatever amount they wish to their own campaign, whether it's a contribution or a loan. And then, you know, so I would say that is not subject to a limit.
Go ahead.
Oh, Councilmember Kennedy, I would agree with the clerk, and then also, and that's sort of not for the council this evening, nor as independent expenditures for the council this evening.
Got it. But the reality is that's what we're facing, and then subsequent to Lois Richards' defeat, an African American was elected in District 1 because we were able to marshal the forces of a very diverse community for a highly qualified candidate. I think the candidate was, if I have it correct, Joyce Streeter, Isaac Richard, and now former Vice Mayor and Council Member Tyrone Hampton. I think, Mayor, that we could actually get to 5 votes. I don't think it's a wrong thing to do. I do understand the sentiments of those who have expressed them. I think they are good sentiments. But you know, in at least 60 years, the system has worked in the city of Pasadena. All systems are imperfect. And if you would like a second, you'll have a second from me. If you don't want a second, that's fine. But I still think we can get to 5 votes and move on and have successful elections, and that any one candidate who's running for office who happens to be extremely wealthy cannot really take the race because they're so wealthy. You'd have a diversity of donors as opposed to one candidate being able to put, as I said, $100,000 in their race.
The ordinance will require someone to offer it at the appropriate time, but let's turn to Mr. Hampton first.
Thank you. I appreciate all of the public comments that have come in. It is a lot of what I'm hearing, you know, with some of the comments being corruption and big money that have bought out special organized groups. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. And so I think we really need to strengthen our TPA. If my next door neighbor decided she wanted to give me $7,000 for my campaign, my political campaign, I think that would be her prerogative to do so. Or if there's more. I mean, that's never been my, I laugh about this because that's never been my problem. I'm actually normally the guy that's outspent 6-1 or 8-1 in most of my campaigns. It really, at the end of the day, gets down to the grassroots constantly knocking on doors. But I do think that if you live in a district where you know, everybody can't afford to give you, $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 check, where campaigns are really expensive, and our campaign process and how we recently changed our campaign, a cycle, has actually changed the cost per election. I mean, per council district, I don't know what everybody else is paying, but just to get mail out, most people are sending out, 5-6 pieces of mail. I mean, you're looking at $8,000 per mailer. I mean, and that's because the U.S. Postal Service ain't cheap. I mean, it's not the flyer that you actually are paying for, it's the mail. So I think that it is really expensive to run a campaign because we have changed, and I fought really hard against that, and I said that that's going to open the doors for large independent expenditures, which we have seen more of here recently in our more recent campaigns. I would like to see if there's a way we could cut down on those independent expenditures, even if there is any legal way we could do that and stop that from happening. But I do, as I mentioned before, think that our TPA needs to be strengthened, because any organization that we vote on their actual contract and their raises, any, I want to say bargaining unit, we should not be able to receive campaign contributions from. At the end of the day, that's where the sticking point is in American politics, is that major organizations are paying for elections. And that doesn't mean that the candidate has been bought out by that organization, but there's that perception of that. So Mayor, I think, I mean, I would motion to move forward with, well, it sounds like Councilmember Kennedy maybe already made that motion. But if anyone will take the amendment of strengthening our TPA so that we include cannabis companies, other large developers, and organize bargaining units to add to that list, so that we cannot receive checks from them at all. I would like to add that to the motion.
Is the TPA, I'm looking at the city attorney, is the TPA a charter matter?
Mayor, the TPA itself is in the charter. The council has adopted some rules to implement it, but if there were an interest in changing how the TPA is structured, that would require the council to put a measure to the voters.
Now, the state contribution limits that we're talking about, they would apply, excuse me, they would apply year-round or only during an election cycle when a candidate is running for office?
I believe it's per election, and I'm not sure whether it pertains to sort of primary and runoff, where that's treated as two or one.
It's two. It's per election cycle. So the primary would be one. Again,
$4,900.
yeah, giving an advantage to the incumbent, and then the runoff would be another one, giving the incumbent. But that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to, so if you know, I was just elected, I'll use myself as the example. What stops me from going out to raise money right now in the next 3 years to prepare for the next election cycle?
State law right now caps it at $4,900.
Right, but I could raise, so if I have an office holder account, for example, I can go out and raise $4,900 from multiple sources, open up my campaign account and begin to raise that money as an incumbent, correct?
And I don't think AB 571 stops a candidate from doing that.
Yeah, that's the issue is, you know, I, as newly elected, have a tremendous advantage. Anyone who's been newly elected would have a tremendous advantage to go out and raise money right now. And so, you know, when it comes time for this mayoral seat to be up, guess what? You know, the mayor has raised a lot of money, and now who's going to challenge? And that's what's happened with the Board of Supervisors, colleagues. That's what's happened with LA City Council, and we're starting to see the outcome of that. I mean, they have campaign contributions, and now, you know, the federal government is looking very closely at the LA City Council, the Los Angeles Board of Supervisors, with campaign contribution limits. And, you know, I'm prepared to say, I'm prepared to say, let's send this to Legislative Policy Committee, but for more review. But recall that it will strengthen the position of incumbents, because nothing stops incumbents in between election cycles from raising money. And then when the election, when it comes time to file for election, the money's in the bank, as it has been in Los Angeles, city of Los Angeles, and the county of Los Angeles, and the state. I mean, you know, the assembly members and senators are constantly raising money, and you know, they stick to the quote unquote limits per check, but they spend most of their time raising money to prepare. And by the time someone says, you know, we need to change in that office, well, it's too late, because they've spent 2, 3, 4 years raising the money that they need to fend off any potential challenge. Ms. Rivas?
Thank you, Mayor. I believe in the hypothetical you're setting out, though, defaulting the state limits would actually limit the advantage you're talking about. It would limit it to $4,900, as opposed to right now being able to raise unlimited amounts. And I guess I'll defer to the city attorney, but that's my understanding of the state law.
During the election cycle, I think the state law applies, and I'll look at the city attorney, but my understanding is the state law would apply once papers are filed. But we can all have, office holder accounts. We can have, we can go around and talk to people about, our desire to run for reelection 3 years from now. And that's how the independent expenditures get started. And I've seen it happen in LA. I've seen it happen with the county, with the city, with the state. And that's why historically I've not supported it, because it's just a slippery slope in my view, incumbent protection. But I don't know, I'll look at the
Don't have an immediate answer for you, Mayor, in terms of when the clock starts. I do
Yeah.
know it's per election, but if we can either, if the council moves this ordinance forward, we can come back to the council writing, or if it's moved to a committee, we can come back
Yeah.
at the committee.
What I've seen happen is, if you look at the state and county, the state, whether it's Senate or, constitutional offices, they're constantly fundraising for that reason. And, assembly races and Senate races and supervisorial races with contribution limits, like City of LA races, are much more expensive today than they ever were. The difference is the independent expenditure, and the difference is the incumbents can use, if they're elected, the time between elections to go out and raise money. That's what happens, and that's what they do. And I would challenge anyone to look at what's happened and dispute that. But we can send this to the Ledge Policy Committee if that's the will of the council for more review. I'm happy to do that. Mr. Madison, I saw you.
I'm looking at the agenda. We've got 7 closed session items. We've got to do something here. And at some point, if we're just continuing to talk about it, that probably augurs in favor of moving it to a committee.
I'm happy
to get to the other business that we have.
I'm happy to do that. If that's the will of the council. Mr. Madison, your Ledge Policy Committee would be the natural one.
Certainly.
And we can review it and have a hearing there and have all these questions answered. And look at the history of elections where we do have, and the cost of elections and what's happened where there are contribution limits. And, maybe look at those as examples that we do or don't want to follow. Okay.
We have a meeting next week. I tentatively approved an agenda today, but I would ask the staff to go back and add at least the beginning of a discussion so we can sort of frame the issue for that meeting that we have next week.
And, and again, the fundraising is something the public doesn't see. We all receive the invitations to all these different fundraisers in between elections, where the incumbents are using the opportunity to raise money before an election is even on the public's radar. Okay, so I think
just wanted to make sure that at Ledge Policy with a TPA discussion we talked about there.
Yeah, Mr. Madison's the chair, and we can schedule that. And I would invite the public to participate in that, because I'm telling you, what's happening in Los Angeles and with the County Board of Supervisors in the state is very, very compelling. Okay, all, by the way,
Thank you.
With contribution, contribution limits.
I only mention it because the previous council, when the TPA was formed, they elected not to add in bargaining units. So I don't know if we could reopen it, or does it have to come back to the voters to have something added to or adjusted? So I would like to know that.
Yeah, we'll Mr. Madison will make note of that and ensure that we have an answer to that question at Ledge Policy.
So by consensus, this is referred back to the
remanded. Remanded is the word of the night.
Remanded back to the Legislative Policy Committee.
Yes. Okay. With that, I think we are going to recess, Mr. Clerk, into closed session.
Yes, we have to adjourn in memory.
Thank you. Councilmember Williams has made a request that we adjourn in memory of Miriam Casella, a longtime Pasadena resident who was tragically killed, but before that contributed greatly to the city of Pasadena, her neighborhood, and to education in general. And so we'll adjourn in memory of Miriam Casella.